We're here as usual with a very, very interesting guest. We have with us today Mimsy Sadofsky. Mimsy is the co-founder of Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. And this is an extraordinary school, which I'm privileged to have spent some time visiting. Good morning, Mimsy.
Good morning.
And Mimsy was born in Houston, Texas, and graduated from Rice University. Spent some time as a family with older children, and has done some extensive work co-authoring books about Sudbury, Legacy of Trust, Kingdom of Childhood, Starting a Sudbury School. And let's talk a little bit about the Sudbury School, the Sudbury Valley School. How did the school begin, and when did it begin, and for what reason?
The school began in 1968. A group of people, some of whom were just interested in education and others of whom had children of their own, were trying to figure out what they thought was the best idea for educating young people. And they sort of decided to start with nothing and see what made sense. So they discarded all the other ideas that were sort of givens for all other schools and came up with the fact that children and people are naturally curious and naturally work at all stages of their life to build upon their understanding of the world and increase their understanding of the world. So it didn't seem like it was necessary to push them in various ways to increase understanding of the world. And it especially didn't seem that it was necessary to do that because little by little people get exposed to a tremendous amount over their lives. So it's not as if they're never going to learn that they need to use arithmetic to use money, for instance, or to read in order to read a sign.
So learning for children, quantitatively speaking, has to do with meaning. In your estimation, the meaning and the relevance of everyday life rather than subjects that are taught irrelevant to whatever is happening concurrently in a child's life. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, that is what I'm trying to say, and it was actually very, very interestingly and well put. Of course, as life goes on for every one of us, what we're interested in shifts and changes and becomes more and more sophisticated. And we expect that to happen with every single child that exists, basically, every single child that exists in this school, certainly.
Now, describe for us some of the things that are happening around the school. In your school, there are not traditional kinds of classes. There aren't students walking around. The ages of your children are from 4 to 19?
Yes, that's correct.
The children aren't in classrooms studying English, social studies, mathematics. What are the children doing right now as we speak?
They're playing basketball and riding bikes and reading books and talking about what they did over the weekend, talking about political issues, talking about anything that might come up ever in a conversation between two people, meeting new people because we happen to have a lot of visitors today, swinging, anything, eating, almost anything you can imagine people doing in a large family, in a really large family because we have 210 kids. They're doing here today. That means that some of them will be studying traditional subjects in a traditional manner, and most of them won't. So if you think of going to a large party with, 200 people, there'll be people stuck away in the corner reading some book they found on the shelf, and other people stuck away in the corner reading some book they brought with them, and lots of other people mixing in various ways or doing sports, things like that. Playing cards, playing Dungeons and Dragons or Magic cards.
So your facility is a very, very large house.
Well, it's a large house. Maybe a very large house. I'm not sure we get two varies for it.
And there are grounds. What is the physical space like for those who haven't visited there?
It's an old It's a beautiful place. It's 10 acres of gorgeous land in New England, that's first of all. It has a granite building on it, and also what used to be a barn, a shingle building that used to be a barn, which is a pretty large barn, actually. And both of those buildings are in constant use. In the barn-type building, there are sound-deadened music practice rooms with lots of equipment and lots of people doing various things. There's video games areas. There's a big meeting area in which you can have big meetings or performances, but you can also have lots of other things going on at the same time, because it can be thought of as many small areas. The main building has a kitchen and a photo lab and an art room, and
you have a computer room too, don't you?
Yep, a science lab, an internet room with a bunch of computers that are on a very fast internet line, and an office, and just a bunch, and then a bunch of other rooms, which are probably the most important rooms in this building, because they can be used for anything under the sun.
So no one can walk into a room and say, this is the English room, or this is the mathematics room.
Well, that is a little hard to do, since English and mathematics don't really need specific areas. But for instance, if you wanted to work with some people and you needed a blackboard, there's only about 4 rooms, or 3 rooms, I guess, that have blackboards. So you would ask to have that room at that time, and the people in it would say, oh, okay, and they'd go somewhere else.
All right. Now,
pretty much live and let live attitude, so no one would say, oh, no, we're not vacating.
Now, do you have teachers in your school?
We have adults. They're called staff members, and they do sometimes teach, as do most of the kids, but their main purpose is to be here as resources and as people that work on that make sure the school's running appropriately and properly, and sort of as role models for what it's like to be a grown-up. Hopefully we're okay at being grown-ups.
So there are not specific staff members that do specific things like the secretary, the janitor, the English teacher, the art teacher.
Well, there are and there aren't. There are specific staff members who you would be more likely to go to for certain things. For instance, if you were interested in playing the drums, you would not get anywhere near me. There's a person here who's a musician, and you talk to him about how you get started and what you would do and how to use the equipment. But some of us are generalists, some of us are specialists. I think we're all elected for 1 year at a time. There's no tenure. And I think what we're elected for is who we are rather than our specific teaching. But that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily have them. I mean, we often do, most of us do, and most of us do some work in areas in which we have expertise. It's just that that's not necessarily how we're going to be spending most of our time.
You said you get elected every year. There's no tenure, and one's job doesn't necessarily mean you'll be back from year to year. How is that election process held? Who elects you, and what's the process that goes on here?
Well, actually today is staff election day, which makes it a day that all of us grown-ups are a little bit nervous. But what happens is that the polls are open all day, and they're manned by students who have been elected to do that. And there are big paper ballots in which you're asked several questions about each potential staff member, about sort of evaluating their work, like how well does this person do the job of helping to run the school, or how well does this person, do you feel this person does a good job of working with kids? There are three sort of major questions, and then you get to vote yes or no for each person, and if you vote yes, you circle the number of days you wish that person would be there the next year. And based on the outcome of this election, the school meeting, which is a weekly meeting of student staff, one person, one vote, decides how to offer contracts and negotiates contracts with staff candidates.
Since the students then are the people who vote in the those who will be staff members next year, is that correct?
Well, yes, I have a vote too, but there are 11 staff members and 210 students. So as you can see, it's the students that really vote people in. Yes.
Do the staff campaign for jobs? I mean, do teachers go around campaigning to become a teacher in the school? How does that work?
If you have never been a staff member here, then you need to visit for long enough to get to know everybody and for everybody to form some sort of opinion about whether or not you'd be useful to have around. And you could call that campaigning. It doesn't look quite like Bush and Gore campaigning, but it's not completely and utterly different either.
I've been there, actually, at this time several years ago when the staff members were campaigning for office, so I said it in tongue-in-cheek, but it seemed to me that, they were going around and talking to people and not unlike our presidential candidates at the moment. Tell us, this sounds like the process you go through to have people, this whole process sounds like the ultimate democratic process. Is that what it is?
Well, I don't know if it's the ultimate democratic process, but it's a very democratic process. And yes, the idea of the school is that you are not only responsible for your own education here, but you're responsible for the whole community in conjunction with other people. And that sort of makes being responsible for your own education a little bit less of a fairy tale and more down to earth, because it's a very real community with very real responsibilities and very real calls to judgment on many, many different subjects every day for everybody, not just for grown-ups, but for every child also.
So do the students then, are they those at the all-school meeting once a week that create the policies for the school?
The school meeting manages the school. And basically, yes, they do create the policies, but there is another group called the Assembly, which includes student, staff, and parents, which has the right to make broad policy for the school. So the students couldn't suddenly change it from a school that has no requirements to a school that requires 3 hours of classes every day. But the Assembly could do that if it so wished.
Are you accredited or recognized by the state of Massachusetts? You are a private school, obviously.
We are a private school. In Massachusetts, you need to be recognized by the town that you're in. It's the town's approval that you need in order to operate, and we have been approved by the town of Framingham since 1968. We have a very good relationship with the town of Framingham. They're very respectful of what we're doing, and we haven't had any problems with that relationship.
So now let's go back a little bit. How are, for example, problems dealt with in the school, since there's really no administrators, so to speak, and there really aren't teachers, so to speak, there's just staff members who are there? How would you define how, for example, if something happened, one child hit another, or dealing with discipline in the school, how does that function in your democratic process?
I will talk about it, but first I will say that it is strangely unlikely for one child to hit another here. Very, very nonviolent environment, and that's actually something that we try to screen for in enrollment time, because every child in the school is totally free to be wherever they want to be, which means you have unsupervised 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds. And so you want to be pretty careful that you don't have people that hit, which does not mean that we are without problems or that everyone here behaves perfectly, far from it. But we have a judicial system that is an arm of the school meeting. And the judicial system meets daily, every morning at 11, composed of students. Staff member meets.
For some reason, you're trailing off and I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Would you repeat what you just said about the judicial system, because it didn't register?
Yes. We have a judicial system which meets daily at 11 o'clock and investigates written complaints about possible rule violations. The judicial committee, which is what meets, is made up of students 2 of whom are elected and 5 of whom are selected by lot from various age groups. And they meet each day with a different staff member. And you can make anybody in the school, whether you're 4 or 44, can make a complaint, a written complaint about anything they think has happened that might be a violation of the rules. And the complaint is examined by the committee and investigated, and the committee decides what they actually think happened, which may have nothing to do with what the person wrote, with what the person who wrote the complaint thought happened. And based on their findings, they may charge someone with having broken a rule. It's like a little court system. Very little and not very scary. And
are there attorneys?
No, well, there is a part where an attorney might come in handy, but basically in the judicial committee itself, the judicial committee is mostly an investigative body. And once it makes the charge, then a person has the right to plead guilty or not guilty. If you plead guilty, you haven't needed an attorney. If you plead not guilty, that's when you might need an attorney because you're going to have a trial. And, your attorney might be a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old. It's not as if you have to, there aren't any real attorneys here, so it doesn't make any difference. But you may decide to be defended by almost anyone, and the committee has to find someone to prosecute you. And the trial is a very orderly thing, but doesn't happen very often because most people in this school, mostly you're not accused unless you've done something because the committee's pretty careful about its work. And mostly when you've done something, you say, yeah, I did it, because that's sort of the atmosphere here. And so trials are a very big deal, and they usually have to do with a dispute about the interpretation of a particular rule, rather than somebody saying they didn't do something and somebody saying, yes, you did. It's more like somebody saying, well, I don't think that was against the rule, and the committee saying, we think it was. So after either a guilty plea or a guilty verdict, if such a thing happens, you can be sentenced by the judicial committee in many different ways. Exciting sentences like warned never to do that again, or you can't go in a certain room for a day, or you have to do the trash an extra time, or something like that.
So the process is much more relevant than the actual consequences, what you're trying to say.
Absolutely. The consequences are as nothing. In general, although I think people like, it's my feeling after watching it over the years that people like the idea of having a sentence and sort of expiating the sin, having it over with, not having to think, oh my God, I was so stupid forever, just sort of getting it done, not thinking about it anymore.
Have there any serious problems, things like stealing that have happened that have created... By the way, you're listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. You may reach us anytime at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PRO-KIDS. Or you can call, email us at PROKIDS. That's PROKIDS at RLC.net. That's PROKIDS at RLC.net. You can also speak with Mimsy if you'd like. Mimsy, can we give out the school number?
You can give out the school number. You can give out our email address, which is kind of an easier way to get in touch with people directly because there's a tremendous amount of traffic through the school's telephone system.
Would you like to give the email address?
Yes, it's SUDVAL, Sudval, at AOL.com. And we have a web page, which is, sudval.org.
Okay, it's SUDVAL at AOL.com, SUDVAL.org.
For the web page, right.
Okay. Now, and for those who don't have computers, it's 508-877-3030.
That's correct.
We're talking about the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. This is one of the most unique schools that's been around since 1968. It is what we might consider a democratic school where the students have a tremendous participation in both the social aspect, the disciplinary aspect, and the learning aspect in terms of what they are learning in the classroom. Now, let's go back a little bit. We were talking about consequences, and suppose someone did something like stealing money, for example. We wouldn't just have a slap on the wrist, I'm sure.
I'm afraid not. That would probably lead to a suspension. It's very much a school based on respect and trust, and theft is considered a tremendous violation of trust and a tremendous destabilizer in a community like this. We all leave everything we have lying around and expect it to be respected and not harmed by others. So stealing, when it has happened, which is not very often in the history of the school, has been dealt with very severely.
Let's go back to the learning part of the school, the learning strategy. And we presuppose that all children learn. They learn at their own pace, and they learn because they're passionate about learning. How does this prepare a child, for example, to go on to college when they must take SAT scores and must function in a very different setting in a college situation?
Well, kids who leave here are usually extremely well prepared to go to college. First of all, they're very knowledgeable. They're very articulate, and they're very knowledgeable. And if you want to go to college, and you want to go to a college in which you need SAT scores, which certainly is not every college at all, then that's one of the things you're motivated to do, is to learn how to do well in the SATs. This is not a strange idea. It's funny, someone came recently, a guest came to the school, and he said, "Oh, I knew someone from the school once. This person was a teacher. I tutored him in math. He had graduated from your school, and yet he knew very little math, and he wanted to take the SATs, but within 6 weeks, he had learned everything I had to teach him." So that speaks to motivation. This child was not interested in learning math until he needed it for the SATs, and when he needed it for the SATs, he just ate it like candy. But colleges are not as different from Sudbury Valley, I think, as high school was in Sudbury Valley, because you're expected to have a lot more autonomy and a lot more responsibility for doing what you need to do in college than you are in high school.
There's some problem here with your trailing off, and I don't know if it's our phone or if it's your phone, but
I've never had this happen with my phone before.
Your phone is gone.
My phone is gone.
So then what you're saying is that students when they are motivated to learn, will learn rather quickly instead of being drawn out, taken into bits and pieces and little bitty segments like we tend to do in our schools today. When they are motivated, they can learn instantly.
Well, maybe not instantly, but quickly, yes. And the SATs are a big motivating factor. What is meaningful to you is easier to learn than what is not meaningful to you. It's as simple as that. So if you're excited about something or interested in it, you tend to learn it much more quickly, which is one of the reasons we don't worry about the fact that kids spend very little time doing what looks like academic work here, because we know they're perfectly capable of doing any of that stuff whenever they want to. But they usually find when they get to college that taking tests is scary at first. And other than that, there's only one other thing that gets to them at college. Kids who go to school here are used to doing their best. And when you go to college, you can only do your best some of the time. You can't do your best all the time because you have to balance a lot of pressures. So they have to learn how to not always do their best,
That's ironic.
It is really ironic, isn't it? But that's okay. It's something you have to learn in life. You have to learn to set priorities in life, and they do that.
What types of things do the children learn at Sudbury School?
Well, I think they learn every type of thing, but there's some things that I think every kid has to learn here because you can't be here and not learn that. One of those things is to love the outdoors. Kids can spend as much time outside as they want here, and that's very, very, very healthy for their minds, their hearts, their souls, their bodies. And there's not a kid who's gone to school here who doesn't afterwards talk about how important the outdoors was to them. And I think the whole idea of the governance of the school means that they have to constantly examine ethical issues. And that's another thing I think kids who go to school here cannot possibly not learn. But once you've gotten past those things, then it can be anything. It can be physics, it can be art, it can be music, it can be all those things. It can be whatever you're passionate about or excited about, or whatever you happen to be accidentally exposed to, which happens a lot too. One of my children who went to school here, my children all went to school here, and one of them was in college and had to take a foreign language course, and he chose Spanish. And I said, "Oh my God, you can't do that. You don't know what a noun is or a verb." And he said, "Of course I do." I said, "Well, okay," thinking, okay, maybe everybody in the world knows what a noun or a verb is. I said, "You certainly don't know about pronouns or adverbs. This is the supportive mother, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "How?" He said, "Well, looking things up in the dictionary when I was playing Scrabble." So that's an example of, and he did. He knew plenty. And that's an example of totally accidental, incidental learning, but maybe not really. Maybe it was really stuff that he was interested in, and that's why when he looked things up in the dictionary, he noticed things about words that you or I might not have noticed.
Very fascinating, very fascinating. So students learn then at their own pace, at their own rate, the kinds of things that they want to learn, and end up with a much broader perspective on life, with greater resources, critical thinking skills, a love for the outdoors, the ability to examine ethical issues. These are all the kinds of things that the children in our public schools today are missing.
That's exactly right. And what we think is most astounding about the kids who go to school here is that they feel they're in control of their lives. And, you know, all of us are only in a limited control of our lives. Things can happen to anybody. But the kids who go to school here feel very profoundly that they can influence their lives in any way they want, and that they can influence the world. And that's a miraculous thing, to not feel that they're being pushed and pulled by the tides, but to feel that they can take charge and do what they want in life.
That is...
Never occurred to them that there's any other way.
That is absolutely extraordinary, because for the most part our children feel that they have no control and grow up as adults who feel that they have no control over their own lives and are just prone to whatever comes down the pike in terms of adult business, educational controls, legislative, whatever it is. And these children have just the opposite points of view. I find that extraordinary. You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We're here every week, and we are here today with Mimsy Sadofsky, a co-founder of the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. You may reach us at any time at toll-free 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PROKIDS. Or you may reach us by email at prokids@rlc.net. We also have a website, which currently is www.rlc.net/prokids. That's www.rlc.net/prokids, and that will be changing shortly, which is why I said currently. You may reach Mimsy Sadofsky at the site email sudvalley, SUDVAL, @AOL.com. That's SUDVAL @AOL.com. Or at the website www.sudval.com.
.org.
I'm sorry, .org. SUDVAL.org. Or you may call the school at 508-877-3030. That's 508-877-3030. And we will be back in our second half hour with Mimsy Sadofsky again, talking about this unique democratic school that enables students to control their lives, examine their ethical values, love the outdoors, and love life and learning itself. We'll continue in a few moments. Please join us for our second half hour while we listen to our station break and our sponsors. You are listening to Children Come First. We're back. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and we're here with Mimsy Sadofsky from the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. And Mimsy, there are many books that you have about the Sudbury Valley School: The Legacy of Trust, The Kingdom of Childhood, Starting a Sudbury School. And they're all published by your school, the Sudbury School Press. I'm sorry?
And many other books are published by our school, too, that are about the school.
And you also have videotapes as well about the school. Where can people find, do they just go to your website or your email address to find out about what's available?
They can order through the website. They can send their name and address to our email address, and we'll send them a listing. Yeah, but our website has a complete listing, and you can order right through it.
Okay. And I suggest people, if you can, to purchase the video, because it really gives a tremendous amount of information about the school. The one interesting part about that video, Mimsy, is that there are Japanese individuals speaking, and it's there's one of the videos with English subtext. What was that all about? Did the Japanese come and observe your school?
I was wondering which particular video you were talking about, but now I know. Yes, a group of people filming from NHK, which is the major educational network in Japan, came and spent about a week and a half here filming. It was quite an experience for all of us, I think. I think that every one of them who came, there were 4 people, was changed by it. And I think we were changed by it, too, because they were such remarkable people to work with. But then they broadcast their program and included commentary by several people knowledgeable about education and children in Japan. And amazingly enough, it was pretty positive commentary, which was kind of exciting. We didn't have any idea what it was going to be beforehand, of course.
Why did they come and visit your school?
Why did they come and visit our school? Well,
and how did they find out about it?
It's a very good question, and I should have a better memory of the answer, but the long answer. But the short answer is there's a lot of sort of turmoil in Japan now about the educational system. Their educational system, which has been held up by other people as a model, and certainly in many parts of the United States and by many people in the United States as a model, is thought of by them as not so wonderful because they have they feel that they're not educating people to be creative, that their educational system causes tremendous stress among kids. They have a high suicide rate and a very high dropout rate, considering the stress placed on education in their society, and people, when they reach college age in Japan, often fall apart. So they have a lot of problems with their own educational system. They don't feel that it's valid for the 21st century, and they're trying to figure out ways to make changes. And there are a lot of people in Japan now working on schools that are similar to this, or maybe not so similar to this, but free in various ways.
I saw about 12 students at the school in Pennsylvania, the Apatina School in Pennsylvania. So it seems that the Japanese are really very interested in our free schools here.
They are. There are a lot of Japanese students at Summerhill, which is sort of the prototype free school in England.
Now, let's go back to Sudbury Valley. If children don't choose the basics to learn, do they waste their time year after year after year? And what happens if they choose to go fishing, as you have in one of your textbooks?
Well, I think if you remember that story,
Oh, I remember it well.
the child who chose to go fishing wasn't exactly missing the basics. He was reading about fishing and doing research on fish and doing all sorts of things that had to do with fishing. But we think that if something's basic, then that's what it means. It means that it will be quite obvious to each person that they need it. That doesn't mean that that every child decides reading is basic when they're 6. Some may decide when they're 2 or 4, and some may decide when they're 10. And we don't make any value judgments about it, because that only means that for that particular person, reading wasn't important yet if they didn't do it till they were 10. Reading wasn't something they needed in order to gain knowledge. Many people gain knowledge more through reading and others more through conversation or visual stimulation. So we're not worried about the basics. We think if they're basic, everybody will figure that out for themselves, and they do. And it's not as if they're here in a little perfect heaven all the time either, because they're here 6-7 hours a day, and then they go back into the rest of the world, and they have a very clear idea from the rest of the world and from their friends who are students here what people think of as important and as basic.
So the elemental parts, which comes from our perceptions 300 years ago from Descartes, are obvious to you and don't need to be trained or ingrained like we tend to do in public schools and most of our schools around the country, but in fact you allow children the opportunity to draw from their inner selves and move towards the kinds of things. Tell us a little bit the story about the boy fishing, because I think it's really important. How did he get there, and what happened to him when I think that's a pertinent story for our audience to let them know just how the co-founders think about and respect the child's inner learning.
Well, there were 2 boys that fished all the time, and
well, how did he get there? He was in a public school, wasn't he?
He was in a public school, but he wasn't very old. He was 8 or 9, and he was not comfortable with being told what to do, which is true of most kids who come here at over the age of 4 or 5 or 6. He just was not that comfortable with it, and his parents thought that it wasn't good for him to be told what to do, that it was better for him to be able to figure out what to do on his own. And I think parents who have children who have been very self-motivated before going to school often feel that way once their child gets to school and becomes sort of less self-motivated, a little bit duller. And so he was enrolled here, and he got very excited about the pond and about fishing, and he met a friend who got very excited with him, and they spent years and years together fishing a lot of the time, making noise a lot of the time too. They were kind of rowdy and rambunctious, and they had lots of other friends at school, lots of good friends at school, so they weren't loners. And but their spare time they spent researching fishing, watching fishing videos, which I didn't even know existed, reading every book that had to do with whatever fish science is called. It starts with an ICH, but I can't remember the rest of it. And they became very knowledgeable fishermen. So this particular concentration, which for them was on fishing, was also something that they switched, that both of them switched. They're not fishermen now, or they may still like to fish, but that's not their prime focus. One of them is a computer scientist, and one of them is a musician. But the ability to focus on something and pour yourself into it has been very important for them as they developed other interests through their lives. And they're both very focused, committed people.
So it took learning to just be focused and committed on one subject to allow them the space to know that, and this too shall pass. It's just a passing phase for them to sit fishing every day.
Well, it didn't look like a passing phase when it was 3 or 4 years, but yes, it was a passing phase.
And what we can infer from that then is that what the kind of skills that they learned were patience, especially fishing. If anybody's ever gone fishing, they learned to be patient. They learned how to be resourceful. They learned how to investigate a subject. They learned how to stay focused attention for long periods of time when the results weren't necessarily there. The underlying objectives and the motivation and the passion of fishing definitely taught them so many different skills than just from what might look externally like two boys who are lazy and don't want to do anything. So I really applaud you for your respect in understanding that children have an innate ability to learn, and they will learn no matter what, so to speak.
Yes, I think actually fishing was the 1970s version of video games today, because people still feel the same way about video games. They watch kids who come to school here and spend tremendous amounts of time playing video games, and they see it as mind-numbing. We know, because we see the kids, we know the kids, that it's the opposite of mind-numbing, that they only do this, they only play a particular video game till they've mastered it, and then they go on. And they also play them in extremely social situations with other kids talking all the time. And they develop very deep social relationships. And we know very well that the kind of concentration they put into each video game is mind-building and not mind-numbing. But people still feel the same way about that they felt about fishing in the 70s. It's just sort of a more modern version of it.
Well, generally the context of video and computers is the fact that people are isolated and alone. So you have additionally added a different dimension to it, which is the social context of students talking, which is something that doesn't normally happen in the event of video games and computers. And that dialogue is what we now know builds neurons in the not neurons, I'm sorry, but dendrites to facilitate the learning and to create more capacity for the child to learn. So I think there's a different set of circumstances here than just playing video games, and I want to make that point clear, because everything that is done at Sudbury is also in a social context as well as an environmental context. It is not just an isolated incident for the most part, although there are children sitting reading in corners. They also have interactions with other children as well. So there is much more here going on than what appears on the surface, is what I'm trying to say. Am I correct in that?
You're correct in that, and that is something that we talk about a lot when people say, well, why wouldn't I just homeschool my children? Why would I send them to your school? And we feel that what goes on in a place where there are a lot of other kids, that a lot of equals, a lot of peers, is very different from what can go on at home. It's not that what goes on at home is not going to give you an education, but the full holistic value of the education in a place like this is very high, we think.
Do your children go on to college for the most part, or what kinds of careers do they go on to?
They go on to every kind of possible career. We have the book Legacy of Trust, which you mentioned, is a study of what happens to kids after they leave here, and it found that 80-some% in general went on to college. A higher percent of kids that came here for a bigger percentage of their lives. So the more years you'd spent here, the more likely it seemed that you were likely to go on to college. But it's not a college-centered school, and a lot of kids who do end up going to college don't go directly to college when they leave here. So they may leave saying, I'm probably going to go to college someday, or they may leave saying, I'm going to travel next year or work next year and save money, and then I'll go to college. And that is, in general, what they do. Or they say, look, I've got a great job in the computer industry, or I know what I want to do, and I know how to work on what I want to do, and I don't need college. College has nothing to offer me. So we don't make any value judgments about people making those decisions about their life. And sometimes I think that the people who are the most concentrated and the most brilliant are the ones that are least likely to go to college.
You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We're here with Mimsy Sadofsky from the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. And you can reach us toll-free at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PROKIDS. Email us at prokids, PROKIDS, at rlc.net. That's PROKIDS at rlc.net. You can reach Mimsy at Sudvalley, SUDVAL, at AOL.com. That's SUDVAL at AOL.com. Or you can reach her at 508-877-3030. That's 508-877-3030. Mimsy, your co-founder, Dan Greenberg, also is a part of this and has been for many years. How in the world did you two personally come to the understandings that you have and allow yourself to free yourself of former opinions, beliefs, and judgments about children? I mean, it is unusual to hear people speak as you do regarding how you see children learn and the process by which they are learning, and are comfortable in not being in control of that process. Did you and Dan have some special training for this?
We couldn't be more different from each other in background, Dan and I, and we're certainly not the two founders of the school. The school had a whole group of founders, about a dozen. 4 of them, including Dan and me, still work here now. So we're still as devoted to the ideas as we were 32 years ago. But for me, it was a very personal journey to get here. I grew up just like anybody else, and I went to college just like anybody else, and I had children just like anybody else. And suddenly I had a first grader who my husband and I thought was a wonderful child and very bright. And he was going to school and having stomach aches every day and complaining. And we had learned through the 6 years of getting him to be a first grader that the less we interfered with what he wanted to do, the happier he was. And therefore the happier we were, so far as we could keep from interfering. So he had sort of trained us from early childhood. So when he was unhappy in school, we said, wait a minute, maybe it's not the child. Maybe there's something wrong with the system. And this was mid-'60s, late '60s, and we started doing a little research into education. And, of course, that was the time when lots and lots of books were being written. John Holt was a bigger name than he is now. And he had written books about how children, in fact, a book called How Children Learn. Jonathan Kozol was writing books. There were other people that were writing at that time that were very influential. We read Summerhill. And we said, wow, we think what he needs is no structure. And at that very moment, getting these ideas together. So I had a very different journey than anybody else's. But I think Dan's was probably a much more
I'm sorry, Dan's was a much more
intellectual journey. But I can't really comment on anybody else's journey.
So you basically have developed this school for your own children, and came together with these people to design something in order for your own children to be a part of it.
Yes, that was the primary motivation. But of course, once you get a hold of these ideas, they're too exciting to go away. They're too exciting to put down.
Obviously, you've been there for 32 years.
Yes. Well, it's so wonderful to be in a place where children treat you like a person instead of like somebody they're afraid of, or somebody they're supposed to be nice to. It's so liberating for an adult to be treated that way that it's a fabulous place to be every day.
Are there any other schools around that are Sudbury-like schools?
Yeah, there are quite a few. There are quite a few in this country, and there are a few in other countries, and more worked on and talked about, and we're trying to form more and more of them all the time. There are several in New England, several in California, a few in between.
Are there any in Pennsylvania?
Yes, there's a fabulous school in Pennsylvania called the Circle School in Harrisburg. It is an absolutely marvelous school.
And any other?
There's a school in, you want me to tell you names?
Yeah, the ones in Pennsylvania.
Oh, no, but there's one in Maryland, which isn't very far from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Fairhaven School.
What is it called?
The Fairhaven School.
Where's it at?
Oh, boy. Where is it at?
In Maryland.
I can't remember the name of the town. Ah! Sorry.
That's all right. So How about New York?
I think it's in Davidsonville. How about New York? There is no Sudbury School in New York. No. But there is one in Vermont, the Red Cedar School in Bristol, and there's one in Connecticut, not too terribly far from New York, called Greenwood Sudbury School in, I think it's called Hampton. I think that's the name of the town.
Hampton, Connecticut?
I think, but I'm not 100% sure. And
isn't there one in Virginia?
one in Maine. No, there's one in Delaware, the new school. And I also don't remember what town that's in Delaware. All these things are listed on our website.
Oh, they're all on your website. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And your website is www.sudval.org. That's www.sudval.org. And these are all listed on your website, so we'll have to take a look at your website in order to be able to take a look at these schools. And have these schools been in existence for, last quarter of a century as well, or are they relatively new?
Well, they're relatively new. There's actually a school in Canada called Windsor House in Vancouver that has been in existence a long time, probably for a quarter. But most of the schools have developed in the last 10 years.
I finally figured out what makes the sound trail off on it's when there's background noise. The microphones pick up the background noise in the room instead of your voice. It's interesting. So there are many schools around the country and around the world that are democratic schools in the same respect as the Sudbury Valley School is. Sudbury Valley type, I guess you would call it categorize it as a democratic school. Is that the category?
Yes.
Where the students are assisting in the running of the school and in their own curriculum and their own education. Is life chaotic there? I mean, is it really chaos? I saw 200 children everywhere, from in the house to all over the buildings and outside, inside. There was constant movement all the time. And I would consider that chaos, except I believe what you are telling me is that there is direction and intentionality to the chaos.
To each person's movement, which in 210 people moving with their own intention can feel kind of chaotic. If you are not sort of if you're not sort of into it. The idea is chaotic. It's less chaotic if you're part of it, because you realize that people are very aware of everything around them and very aware of the community. So and they're not just rushing madly off in all directions. To me it's one comparison that I think of is that if you go to a school, an elementary school, during recess, the kids burst out of the building, or maybe they have to walk out, but they burst into action once they get out of the building, and they're a little bit wild. And the kids here, although they're very exuberant, are not wild at all. And that's part of why I don't think that it's chaos. It's each person's mind. Each person is not chaotic in their own mind, but they're also not chaotic in their actions. They're playing, they're happy, they're full of fun, they're running around a lot, but it's not wildness at all.
Do you allow people
off? I hope that will make. I wish I had realized that sooner, that it was a background noise. There's a computer.
That's it.
Room.
Do you allow people to come and visit your school?
Rarely.
Rarely?
We allow families who have children that they're thinking of enrolling to come and visit, and very, very few other visitors, because there's a tremendous pressure to visit, and we don't have the facilities for it. We don't have the physical or the mental facilities for it, and children get tired of being looked at as goldfish in a bowl.
I can understand that completely. So the only people that really can come to visit are those who would be considering coming to the school, and or those who might be opening up a school such as yours.
Definitely those categories, and people who are interested in becoming staff, of course, allowed to visit.
And people who are interested in becoming staff members. Well, this is just such an extraordinary. Now, has your education department in the state of Massachusetts recognized you?
I don't have any idea what the education department in the state of Massachusetts is doing. They're not interested in us, as far as I know. They're not uninterested. They're not hostile. They're not friendly. They're not interested.
With all the problems in the public education sector, you would think that they would be willing to come along and take a look at what you have in order to be able to try and do something different.
Oh, well, I think if we were if we were doing a lot of testing and showing that our kids were learning faster than other kids, they would be, but testing is not what we're interested in, so.
Which is wonderful for students anyway, since tests really don't... I heard from a colleague a story about testing and what it really is measuring, and it was an example of his learning Chinese, for example. He knew nothing about Chinese, but he got a set of directions that told him how to put each symbol matching with another symbol. And in equivalence, the person, he then took a test, and the person who was monitoring the test gave him a very high score and assumed that he automatically knew Chinese. But in essence, he knew nothing about Chinese. He couldn't understand it and he couldn't speak it. But what he could do was match one symbol with another, which is basically what we do when we test children. And I've done that in a very, we teach them the symbols and how to match one symbol to the next, and think that is learning and has depth of meaning for our children, when in fact it has no meaning and no relevance whatsoever to real life and the learning process. And then we wonder why we have children who have problems.
The scary thing to me is that children actually feel that if they're better at matching those symbols, they're smarter or better at learning. That's what's really terrifying, because they're not.
In these last few moments of our broadcast, we have about 2 minutes to go. Is there anything you'd like to say to sum up the Sudbury Valley School, and any information you'd like that we perhaps missed to give to our listening audience?
Well, I don't know. I think this is a wonderful idea as a way to educate children. I think that this produces kids who feel very good about life and about themselves. And for people who are interested in making that possible for children, we will help them in a lot of ways, and we offer a lot of materials that can help them start a school. So maybe it's something they should think about doing in their own area.
Well, you have been tremendous, and I really applaud you for your work. We have been speaking this morning to Mimsy Sadofsky, one of the co-founders of the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts, which is a very unique structure, if you haven't listened to it already, where children are allowed and respected to learn at their own rate, at their own time, to take control of their own lives, to examine and govern themselves, to develop ethical issues, to love the outdoors, to respect and honor each other, and to learn from a variety of different venues and resources. You may reach the Sudbury Valley School at sudval@aol.com. That's sudval@aol.com. Or visit their website at www.sudval.org. That's www.sudval.org. Or you may call the Sudbury Valley School at 508-877-3030. If you'd like to reach us here at Children Come First, you may reach me, Dr. Brzezinski, at toll-free 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PROKIDS. Or you may email me at PROKIDS@rlc.net. That's PROKIDS@rlc.net. Or you may visit us on our website at www.rlc.net/ProKids. That's www.rlc.net/ProKids. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Mimsy, for being with us today. Please join us again next week for Children Come First. Have a wonderful week, and give a hug to all those children out there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good week.